Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. In prior episodes, we've talked a little bit about Brian Wilson's writing and production work for other artists. The act that he devoted the most time and energy to outside the Beach Boys was the Honeys, being involved in 9 of 10 sides they released across 5 singles in the 1960s. Though Brian did a lot of great work with other acts, most of it was met with limited commercial success, and most of those original records are very obscure and difficult to find today. Over the years, the Honeys' work has been made available sporadically on bootlegs, on Brian Wilson compilations, and on the occasional Honeys compilation. On nearly all of them, the official releases are sprinkled in with tracks that remained in the can at the time, making it a little confusing as to what was released and when. 4 singles were released in the space of about 1 year between April 1963 and April 1964, with a 5th single being released nearly 5 years later in March of 1969. Of course, this isn't counting solo work or session work or work done under other names or reunion recordings done in the 80s or later, which are all things we've either talked about or will talk about in future episodes. The Honeys trio, of course, consisted of Marilyn Ravel, Brian's eventual wife, her sister Diane, and their cousin Sandra Glantz, who went by the professional name Ginger Blake. As most of us know, Brian was introduced to Marilyn by Gary Usher. Ginger and Gary Usher had been label mates at Titan Records in 1961-62. In addition to co-writing with Brian, Gary was also Dennis's roommate at the time, and it was Gary who suggested getting the harmony singing Wilsons and Company together with the harmony singing Ravels and Company, which happened at Pandora's Box on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood during the Beach Boys' residency in late August 1962. Of course, Brian and Marilyn hit it off. In fact, Brian and the entire Ravel family seemed to hit it off. Brian used his growing prestige with Capitol to get Marilyn, Diane, and their cousin Ginger, who was already the seasoned professional of the group, a deal to cut a single with the label, with Capitol having the option for a follow-up single. With his love of Phil Spector, it's not surprising that the idea of producing a girl group appealed to Brian. He apparently came up with the name the Honeys and at least initially envisioned them as a female counterpart to the Beach Boys. The Honeys, of course, are what surfers called their girlfriends, as in Surf and Safari. And as a nice bit of self-promotion, Diane says they always tried to get the word Honeys into their lyrics somewhere, which they did on the B-side of their first single, Surfing Down the Swanee River and Shoot the Curl. The single was recorded on March 5, 1963, a few weeks after the Surfin' USA album was completed, and a day after the Surfin' USA single was released. The single was released on April 8, 1963, about 2 weeks after the Beach Boys' Surfin' USA album had hit the shops. I've seen Shoot the Curl listed as the A-side of the single from some sources, but it appears that the A-side was actually Surfin' Down the Swanee River. Of course, Surfin' Down the Swanee River is a rewrite of Stephen Foster's 1851 standard Old Folks at Home with new lyrics by Brian. Brian would return to this tune a short time later for South Bay Surfer on the Surfer Girl album with new lyrics credited to Brian, Dennis, and Al. Shoot the Curl was a Honeys original written by Ginger under her real name Sandra Glantz, and Diane, who had already formed a songwriting duo and had tried their hands at writing for other artists, recording a number of demos. A lot of those demos would be released on Honeys compilations decades later, and we'll discuss those later on. The single didn't chart in the US. There are rumors that Capitol and/or Murray didn't want to give it too much promotion, being afraid that a hit with a different group would distract Brian too much from his work with the Beach Boys, which seems like a reasonable hypothesis. The single seems to have had some hit potential. It did much better in Sweden and in Denmark. In Denmark, where it was issued with a picture sleeve different from the US, it first hit number 1 on October 30th, 1963, about 6 months after its US release, and was in and out of the number 1 position for months, being at number 1 for the last time on January 16th, 1964. Interestingly, at number 2 on the Danish chart that week was another Stephen Foster tune, Beautiful Dreamer by John Layton and the Alan Tews Orchestra. It looks as if Denmark was going through a bout of Stephen Foster mania. The single also reportedly went to number 1 in Sweden, though it hasn't been at number 1 on any of the charts I've seen. I'm guessing there were probably multiple charts in Sweden at the time. The Swedish release used the same photo as Denmark, and issued the sleeve in 4 different colors: red, blue, orange, and green. Reportedly, a lot of these were exported to Denmark to help keep up with the demand there. The label credits Nick Venet as producer, who was still being credited as Beach Boys producer at the time. According to the 1981 Surf's Up book, Nick Venet said, "The earliest Honey singles were recorded with him producing from the control room and Brian directing from within the actual studio." The Stephen Foster melody is corny even by 1963 teen record standards. What really saves it is the production and the arrangement, and the playing by crack studio musicians like Leon Russell, Billy Strange, and Hal Blaine is of course excellent and really propels the song along. The Honey's vocals are nicely arranged. There's a certain mild abrasiveness in a lot of early 60s female group vocals, such as the Orlon South Street or the Dixie Bells Down at Papa Joe's, and I hear some of that here too, which kind of dates the record. The third verse features a male lead vocal, which is clearly Brian. Nick Venet's friend Skip Taylor, who all sources point out was later the manager of Canned Heat, is also in there. Their low, careful vocals provide a nice counterpoint to the female vocals. Brian was still dating Judy Bowles at the time of the recording. She reportedly attended the session and was asked to be part of the group contributing hand claps, though she said later that Brian had asked her to stop clapping when he realized that she couldn't keep time. What really makes the record work is the loose, informal feeling of the performance, with things like the girls shouting, "Talk to us," just before the guy's vocal comes in, and the hand claps in the second half of the record. It really sounds like a bunch of friends getting together and having a good time, which I guess is largely what it was. It kind of prefigures the pseudo live party feeling that we'd soon be hearing on a lot of Johnny Rivers hits, and which would be tackled much more deliberately on the Beach Boys' Party album 2.5 years later. It's the combination of dynamic playing and fun, informal vocal performance that make this side really enjoyable. Shoot the Curl is a more standard track. It comes off a bit like a female version of Surfin' Safari. The third verse even starts with an "early in the morning." The chorus, "Shoot, shoot, shoot the curl," "We're gonna ride those boys right out of style," "We're gonna shoot the curl for 1 clear mile," is kind of awkward and has a halting style with pauses that I don't think help it. The verses are better and the surf guitar break is pretty good. This would have been an absolute standout in an AIP beach party movie, but as a surf record, it's pretty standard apart from the high concept in the lyrics that the girls are expert surfers. Brian and Skip Taylor reportedly provided backing vocals on this side too, but to tell the truth, I don't hear any male vocals in Shoot the Curl. A much better Diane Ginger co-write made the A-side of their next single, Pray for Surf, featuring a lead vocal by Marilyn. This second single was recorded on June 24, 1963, about 3.5 months after their first, and 12 days after the Beach Boys had recorded the Surfer Girl Little Deuce Coupe single. Once again, Nick Venet is credited as producer, but this time there's a large, bold, arranged and conducted by Brian Wilson credit right under the Honey's name on both sides of the single. This is apparently the last time Venet and Brian shared production duties. Like Shoot the Curl, Pray for Surf is packed with surfing references and includes another lyrical reference to honeys. In this case, Grammies, Hodads, and all the surfers too, the honeys are telling you, get your feet off the ground. Steve Douglas and Jay Migliore are both credited with saxophone on the single. Whoever played the short sax break in Shoot the Curl is so wild and over the top it sounds like he's going to hurt himself. Throughout the song, it's the blasting saxophone that you really notice in the backing track. The Honeys had recently been doing session work with Jan and Dean, and there's certainly some Jan and Dean influence here. The song in particular is reminiscent in parts of Surf City, with Pray for Surf kind of standing in for Two Girls for Every Boy. The B-side is a Brian Wilson composition, Ollie Oxen Free 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 Hide Go Seek, with a gutsy R&B style lead vocal from Ginger. Once again, saxophone is prevalent in the mix. Am I crazy, or were parts of this melody later reused for Don't Back Down, with other parts being reused for Amusement Parks USA? Let me know if you hear that in there. The single wasn't released until September 2nd, 1963, about 2.5 months after it was recorded. The delay might have been to coordinate it with a proposed Honeys album that was discussed for the late summer but never materialized. We'll talk more about that later. At the time the single was released, the Surfer Girl album was about 2 weeks away from hitting the shops, and the Beach Boys were involved in sessions for the Little Deuce Coupe album. This second Honey single also failed to chart. According to Marilyn, part of the problem was an unexpected objection that praying for surf was sacrilegious, which prevented it from being played on some radio stations, including the mighty KFWB in Los Angeles. Seemingly undeterred, Brian took the Honeys back into the studio 2 weeks and a day after the single's release with another Brian Wilson original for a bigger, more complex recording session featuring reportedly around 40 musicians. The One You Can't Have was recorded on September 17th, shortly after the last work seemingly had been completed for the Beach Boys' Little Deuce Coupe album. The One You Can't Have was written, produced, and arranged by Brian. The first verse names 6 guys. I'm not sure who Jerry, Bob, or Johnny are and whether they're fictional or not. The remaining 3, Brian, Gary, and Larry, are also named again in the ending coda. Brian, of course, needs no introduction. Gary is Gary Leeds, drummer for the Standells at the time. That's him at the bottom center circa 1962 or 3. Here he is second from the right with his arm extended. I'm not sure when this was taken, but I have a sneaking suspicion it was sometime shortly after they'd seen the back cover of Meet the Beatles. Gary had left the Standells by the time of their memorable appearance in the Far Out Munster episode of The Munsters in 1965, and their number 11 hit single Dirty Water in 1966. Instead, Gary Leeds became Gary Walker of the Walker Brothers and moved with them to the UK where they found great success. Larry is Larry Levine, who engineered the session. He had been working with Phil Spector since 1962 and had engineered many of Spector's biggest records, including, most recently, Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals and the Ronettes' new hit single, Be My Baby. In fact, Brian used a lot of people who had worked with Spector on this session, which was held at the Spector favorite Gold Star Studios. Not surprisingly, The One You Can't Have is a big Spector-style wall of sound, everything but the kitchen sink production, and generally regarded as Brian's finest production for the Honeys. The big, barreling, confident sound of the track and the lyrics have always seemed to me to fit right in with the popular early 60s template of the modern teenage girl as energetic, kooky, and candid, like Gidget or Patty from the Patty Duke Show. The B-side, From Jimmy with Tears, carries no production credit on the label. This side seems to have indisputably been produced by Nick Venet, who had left Capitol by the time the single was released. It's the one Honeys side released in the 60s that doesn't seem to have had any involvement from Brian. Back on May 16th of 1963, Venet had taken the Honeys into the studio without Brian to record this and a second track called Raindrops that wouldn't be released until decades later. This session took place about 5 weeks before their second single, Pray for Surf and Hide Go Seek, was recorded, so this track had been in the can for a long time by 1963 standards. Apparently, Venet was interested in recording the Honeys again after their first single, and the session was his idea. According to Marilyn, Brian had told him that he was too busy to work on the session. It's certainly believable that Brian might have been too busy for the session. In mid-May of 1963, Surfin' USA was nearing its number 3 chart peak, and Brian had an almost unbelievable number of irons in the fire. Nevertheless, I get the distinct impression that this session contributed to some bad blood. Without giving any specifics, all the sources that I find talk about these tracks having originally gone unreleased in a dispute over who the Honeys' producer actually was. The song, which Venet apparently chose for the group, was written by 2 seasoned songwriting professionals, Buddy Kaye and Leroy Glover. Buddy Kaye wrote or co-wrote a lot of notable songs, including Full Moon and Empty Arms, recorded by Frank Sinatra, You're Adorable, recorded by Perry Como, Speedy Gonzales, recorded by Pat Boone, the theme from the I Dream of Jeannie TV series, and Change of Habit, recorded by Elvis Presley. Leroy Glover was a songwriter, producer, arranger who worked with a lot of New York-based acts, including the Shirelles and the Angels. It's an okay side, definitely deserving of its B-side status compared to the much better The One You Can't Have. The vocals are nice, though there's a strange affectation to the pronunciation of some of the lyrics, particularly the word letter. I get the feeling it was only used because it was a handy track already completed that could fill out the second side of the single. The single was released on December 2nd, 1963, a week before the Beach Boys' Little Saint Nick single. Once again, as good as the A-side might have been, this third single also failed to chart. Apparently, Brian felt the failure was due to Capitol not promoting the Honeys enough. Having done a deal with Warner's for the Castells single I Do early in 1964, he went back to Warner's and did another deal for the next Honeys single, which was recorded on February 17, 1964. The A-side is another Brian Wilson composition, He's a Doll, and another big production recorded at Gold Star Studios. It features some nice vocal arrangements, a searing saxophone solo, and a driving instrumental backing with flourishes that remind me of Our Car Club and the Beach Boys' later Drive-In. The B-side, The Love of a Boy and a Girl, stands in stark contrast to the big sound of the A-side. It began as a demo of another Ginger and Diane original. The Honeys play and sing it with Ginger on piano and Brian on bass. It's clearly a B-side, but enjoyable in its simplicity. The single was released on April 13, 1964, into the whirlwind of Beatlemania that was sweeping the country and pretty much disappeared. Brian and Marilyn married on December 7, 1964, and the Honeys as a recording group seemed to fade away. Of course, there was one single still to come in the 1960s. We'll talk about that next time, as well as some of the previously unreleased recordings that were found on some Honeys compilations many, many years later. Hope you enjoyed this. Look forward to next time. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done that. And as always, I look forward to your comments. Have a good week. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.